Hey, what's happening, Wargamers? Welcome to another video. This week I'm going to be taking a look at the Adeptus Custodes Codex that recently came out. This is one that kind of, I don't want to say surprised us all, but given how many other books were still slated to come out, it's kind of surprising that they chose this one over one of the various Xenos books that still has to be released, or one of the, basically any of the unreleased books. But having said that, the release itself was a quite nice release. There was a nice chunk of kits that came out with it. Some cool new lore to back up the Adeptus Custodes, what they've been doing for the 10,000 years since the heresy, as well as what they're doing now that Guillemot has come back into the fold. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a quick look through some of the units that are available in the book. I'm going to share my thoughts on them. And as always, remember that I try to look at things not from a strictly competitive standpoint, but from a standpoint of, are these going to be fun to play on the table? What are they going to be like? I will try to weigh in a little bit on where I feel that they might be competitively speaking. But I always try to look at this from a slightly different angle than some of the more competitive or, I guess some of some of the more competitive elements of this. So, let's go take a look at Adeptus Custodes. So before I even start talking about the unit entries, let's just go over a couple of the special rules that are available for the army itself. Right off the bat, you have the Aegis of the Emperor. And this one's a really cool one, because first off, it gives every model in the army a 5-up invulnerable save. So that's going to grant an extra bit of protection against those high strength, high AP weapons, things like the las cannons, the meltas, that sort of stuff. Just give them a little bit of extra durability, an extra chance to sort of survive it when the weapon's going to eat through their impressive armor save. So a nice touch to have. Another really nice thing about it is that whenever they take a mortal wound in the psychic phase, this special rule also grants them a feel no pain on a 6+. It'd be nice to see that sort of more army-wide, just something that keeps them a little bit more survivable, a little bit more durable. But given the amount of mortal wounds that can be put out in the psychic phase, things like Magnus or even Grey Knights or something like that, just with something as simple as Smite, this is a nice extra little bit of touch. Just gives an extra little bit of durability to the army itself, and it's something that is going to help keep them on the table a little bit longer. After that, there are the benefits you get for actually having a battle-forged detachment of Custodes. And these ones are both really nice. You got the Emperor's Chosen, which improves the invulnerable save by 1 for any infantry or biker models with the Adeptus Custodes keywords on it. So again, it just improves that durability. Now, it can't be improved any more than a 3+. But even so, when you're looking at a 5+ just across the board and a couple options to get maybe a 4+, this is a really nice extra touch. It means that with a battle-forged detachment, your basic Custodes units have their 4-up invulnerable save, which again, just great. It's durable. It's a 50% chance of actually being able to pass a lot of these saves up from the high powerful weaponry that's going at them. So really nice touch. And then the other one is their version of Objective Secured. It's the Sworn Guardians. So basically they're going to be able to take and hold objectives, providing a bigger, more expensive unit doesn't come along and take it from them. And with this army, the units are so small, chances are if something bigger and more expensive is coming along, they're either going to be locked in combat and they're going to take you out, or you're just going to turn around and wipe the floor with the Custodes and their high combat abilities. So all really nice elements of the army itself, all nice things that will boost the usefulness of the Custodes and all things that come to play. So just in general, nice little things to keep in mind when we start discussing the rest of the models. And so with that having said, let's go on and take a look at the actual unit entries. So to start us off, we're going to take a look at the named HQ unit that the Custodes have access to, and that is Captain General Trajan Valoris. And right off the bat, this guy is beefy. He comes in at 250 points, but his stat line does reflect it. He's got his weapon skill ballistic skill of 2s, he's got his strength toughness of 5s, he's got a whopping 7 wounds, 5 attacks. This guy is beastly. Whether or not he's worth that point cost, it remains to be seen, but he does add a nice bit of punch to the army. Like a lot of the special named HQs, he does bring his reroll bubble. So so anything within, I believe it's 6 inches, or any Adeptus Custodes within 6 inches are going to get to reroll 1s on wounds and hits. That in and of itself is pretty big, considering a lot of stuff in this book is probably going to be wounding on 2s or 3s to begin with. So anytime you throw a 1 down there, the odds are good that that's essentially going to be a reroll for it. So nice little touch right there. He does have his 3+ invulnerable save. So sadly, it's not going to get improved by the special rule for being a Battleforged Detachment of Custodes. But at a 3+, he's definitely got that durability, especially when you pair with the fact that he's got a 2-up save as well as the 5 toughness. Yeah, he's also got a neat little rule called the Moment Shackle. This is a once per game ability, but allows him to do one of 3 different things. He can either regain D3 wounds that he just lost. Now, mind you, like it has to be done at the time of the phase of losing those wounds, and obviously it can't be used to bring him back from the dead, because that would be a little silly. He also has the ability to pile in and make another attack. Will basically do another attack phase, which again, when you're looking at 5 attacks with his ability to output high strength attacks, that can be a big game changer if you really need an enemy warlord dead, or if you have a unit that just really needs to put some wounds on it. Or additionally, you can regain up to D3 command points whenever you use the stratagem. The caveat here is no more than the amount of command points that were used on that stratagem. All 3 of these, if used properly, can really turn the tide of a battle. It can keep them around a little bit longer, give them a little bit more punch, or give you those command points. And I mean, it's something we've learned in 8th edition so far. Command points are clutch. These things they can make and break the game. So, proper use of them is really a big deal. And the ability to get any of them back is just in and of itself a pretty big deal. And then, of course, you have his loadout. You got the Watcher's Axe, his Misericordia, I believe that's what it's called. That's the one that grants him an extra attack, as well as his melee and ranged version of the Watcher's Axe. In and of itself, the ranged version of the Watcher's Axe, it's essentially a heavy bolter, strength 5, AP -1, and 2 damage. So it does pack some good punch. When you're going to be hitting on 2+ and re-rolling 1s, you're almost guaranteed to get a good chunk of hits in there. Sadly, it is only a rapid fire 1. So a lot of the time you're probably only getting 1 shot off. If you're within striking range, 2 shots, but at least it hits fairly well. The axe is where it's really cool though, because it doubles his strength. So he's running around at strength 10. He's got his -3 to the AP as well. So he's going to be chewing through all but the toughest of armor, and he's dealing D3 wounds or D3 damage with every wound. So when this guy hits, he is going to be hitting like a Mack truck. So all in all, rather nice. I'm not going to go too deep into the other HQ units because they're really just a watered down version of Trajan Valoris himself. But you have your various shield captain options. One in just the standard custodian armor, one in the Alaris Terminator armor, and then one on the Dawn Eagle jet bike. Of the 3 of them, like they all boast some different strengths and weaknesses and whatnot. Of the 3 of them, the one that I personally like, and I think the one that seems to be gaining the most traction online, is the Shield Captain on the Dawn Eagle jet bike. And I think a lot of this comes down to the fact that, he's got his toughness of 6, first off, so, a lot harder to hurt. But he's also got the mobility of the Dawn Eagle jet bike itself, which is really big. And you also have the ability to put out more shots with it because of the Hurricane Bolter or the salvo launchers. The ability to put out 12 shots with the Hurricane Bolter that are hitting on 2s, re-rolling those 1s is absolutely fantastic. It allows you to really go after vulnerable troop units, or any unit really that doesn't have a very high save. I mean, anything with an armor save of 4+ and whatnot is definitely going to have to be worried about this. They also have the standard loadouts that all of the custodians basically have access to. So the Dawn Eagle has the lance as well as the aforementioned Hurricane Bolters or salvo launchers. One of the Alaris Terminator armor has the ballistic grenade launcher, as well as the Castellan axe or spear. And then, of course, the regular shield captain has access to, again, the Castellan axe, the guardian spear, or the sentinel blade, and you can put the storm shield on them. They're all really decent options. Like the rest of the army, they're all relatively high-priced models. But considering how tough they are and how hard they are to remove, they can definitely add a little bit of punch to it. Because obviously you can't take an army of just Trajan Valoris. So having these guys, especially in a Supreme Command detachment and whatnot, you're going to have a rock-solid core of HQ units to throw at the enemy, and they're all going to be able to pull their weight. So all in all, I really like them all, but I think the Dawn Eagle, or the Shield Captain with the Dawn Eagle jet bike, is really where it shines. As far as troops go, unfortunately the Custodes are very limited in this regard. They have their Custodian Guard, that is it. And this one's kind of unfortunate because they are rather pricey. They're looking at 40 points before you even start adding in the optional gear, like their weapons. And that adds up a lot. I mean, if you start looking at a unit of 5 Custodian Guard, all of a sudden you're at 200 points, and you haven't even given them their weapons or their storm shields yet. So this one is kind of unfortunate. I think what it means is that you're not going to see a lot of Custodes armies operate in the normal battalion detachment, simply because there are so many better units in the book that, and the Custodes they add up quite fast, and they don't really, I personally don't feel that they pull the same weight as a lot of the other units do. They don't have the mobility of the Virtus Praetors or the Alaris Terminators, which can deep strike. They don't have the hitting power because they don't have access to the axes. So they're nice. They can really make a solid core to an army, but I think there are better options, and I think that's going to lead a lot of people towards running different detachments of Custodes. Now, having said that, the Custodians themselves are rather beefy. I mean, you have your standard stat line. You have your 5 for toughness and strength. They're still hidden on their 2s for weapon skill and ballistic skill. They have a decent amount of wounds for frontline infantry at 3 wounds. They got their 3 attacks. So, they can definitely put out the hurt. They can definitely hold their own, especially if you give them the Storm Shield. So all of a sudden they're looking at a 3-up invulnerable save. But again, they're very expensive for what they can do, and I think there are places where points are a little bit better spent. So the Custodian Guard, very nice, a bit pricey for what they are. I don't think they're going to find a lot of places on tables, especially if you're running a pure Custodes force. But all in all, they're decent. They're just very expensive. So yeah, take them as they are. Next up, we got the elite units, and this one is this is probably the most heavily stacked entry in the book. Mostly because you have your 2 Vexilis Praetors, one in Alaris Terminator armor and one in the regular Custodian armor. But you also have the Alaris Terminators themselves, or the Alaris Custodians rather, as well as the Venerable Contemptor Dreadnought. And these are all really solid units, but I have to say I really like the Vexilis Praetors. Like a lot of other armies, you want to take advantage of those buff bubbles that you can put out there. So things that give you maybe an extra attack or maybe a reroll, and that is exactly what the Vexilis Praetor does. He's got the 3. So he's got a couple different abilities for it. His Custodes Vexilla, which is basically the standard that he's running with, gives him a couple. So the first ability that the Vexilis Praetor has access to, he can take the Vexilis Imperius, which basically it gives any Adeptus Custodes unit within 6 inches of it +1 to their attack characteristic. So units that are already hitting rather hard and rather often are going to be hitting that much harder. Now this one can be give or take, because a lot of the attacks at the high strength, high AP that the Custodes are already able to put out, a lot of the times they're going to be putting enough hurt onto the enemy units that you might be able to rely on morale rolls to take out the remaining unit, or they're going to be so decimated that they're not really going to be able to put out a lot of hurt back. So this one's a nice one if you're going after elite infantry, things that can take a bit of a beating. But against rank and file things, if you're going up against most basic troops, I can't see this one being a favored one for that one, simply because once you start looking at a Custodian with 4 attacks over 3 attacks, a unit of, let's say 5 of them, all of a sudden you're putting out 20 attacks at strength 5+ that rend through a lot of armor. There's not a lot that's going to be walking away from that. So that extra attack is a little bit overkill. So I personally feel that this one is the weakest of the three. The next one is the Vexilla Imperius. And this one's kind of neat because this one... sorry, not the Vexilla Imperius, I just talked about that one. The Vexilla Defensor. Now this one's kind of neat because it affects anything with the keyword Imperium Infantry. So this is a great unit for a splash entry into any Imperium detachment because it gives a 5-up invulnerable save against any Imperium infantry, or for any Imperium infantry unit that is wholly within 9 inches of it. So being able to grant a 5-up invulnerable save to a lot of different units, especially things like guardsmen and whatnot, can be a big deal. You combine that with the ability to either improve morale or improve invulnerable saves, which, if I recall correctly, I believe Celestine has an ability to do that. That can be huge. That gives a lot of staying power to rank and file troops. So this one's a really good one if you're splashing it as an ally. I could see this guy making it into a lot of Imperial Soup style armies as a result. And just, really nice. It gives that durability that is so important for small armies. And then the last one is the Vexilla, Magnifica. Now this is the one that I personally like the best. It only affects the Adeptus Custodes units themselves. But basically it subtracts 1 to all hit rolls, or to all shooting hit rolls against Adeptus Custodes units when they're within 6 inches of the Vexilla. So this one is huge because it means anything with those high strength, high AP weapons, it's going to be that much harder to hit. You take, say, a unit of orcs, which can just spit out an obscene amount of firepower, hitting on 5s. Now all of a sudden they're hitting on 6s. That reduces their effectiveness massively. So it's an amazing ability. I think that if you're running pure Custodes, this is going to be the one that you see on the Praetors. Whereas if you're running the Imperial Soup, you're going to be seeing the Vexilla Defensor more than that, I believe. Both are excellent options, but honestly, I love the Magnifica. That is the one that I personally prefer. Just because it's a fantastic ability. It keeps your guys alive that much longer. It gives you more opportunity to get across the table. So it is absolutely fantastic. So those are the Vexillas for the... The only other difference between the Praetors is the fact that one can be in the Alar's Terminator armor and one is not. It's only a 20-point difference between the two of them. I think for the benefits that the Alar's armor gives you, go with the extra 20 points. Take the Vexilla's Praetor in the Alar's Terminator armor. You get the Ballistas grenade launcher, which, it's a very solid weapon. Only 12-inch range, but you're looking at assault D3, strength 4, -3 AP, and 1 damage. Just, nice solid weapon to have with them. Gives them a little bit of oomph in the firing phase, with the ability to eat through a lot of armor saves on that one. It's not huge, but between the two of them, I think the 20 points for the extra bit of benefits of the armor and the grenade launcher just really make it worthwhile. So yeah, definitely go with the Alar's Terminator and for the Vexilla's Praetor. And one last thing I forgot to mention, the Vexillus itself does grant a reroll for failed reroll tests for any friendly Imperium infantry and biker model within 6 inches of the Vexillus Praetor, which it's nice. It gives them a little bit more staying power when it comes to the morale saves. When you're dealing with just Custodes, I don't think it's going to come to play all that much, because if you start dropping models and taking a lot of wounds, odds are good you're not in a good position anyway for the morale saves. But for some of the for the more squishy units in Imperial Soup, that's where that one's really going to come into play. Next up, we have the Alar's Custodians. So again, these guys are much like the regular Custodians, but because of the Alar's Terminator armor, they do have that extra wound, they have that extra attack, which, again, extra staying power. They're going to be able to shrug off things that do D3 wounds and eat through, or D3 damage to them, rather. Give them a little bit of extra lasting power, which, again, really nice. They do have the ability to deep strike in, and in this edition, that sort of positional ability is absolutely fantastic. Gives you a lot of control over where your units go. They also have a really interesting ability, the Slayer of Tyrants. Now this one's a neat one because they can basically move 3 inches towards the nearest character, as opposed to nearest enemy unit in the consolidation phase. So they are definitely going after enemy warlords, special characters, elite characters, that sort of stuff, which is really nice because as it is right now, you have to pile in towards the nearest unit. So this gives them an extra, the ability to go towards the nearest character instead, which can allow you to sort of maybe move around tar pit units or meat shield type units, which is really, really nice. How often it's going to come in, I'm not entirely sure, but it's a nice little touch. All in all, though, there's not really a whole lot to say about the Adeptus Custodians. At 70 points a pop, they are rather pricey, but they hit like a Mack truck. They have their defensive power. They are definitely a solid core. I would say that they definitely have some tricks attached to them that it's worth filling in your elite slot for them. Because you don't need a lot of the Vexillus Praetors. So definitely at least a unit of Adeptus Custodians if you're going with a standard battalion detachment to fill in that HQ, or the elite unit. Really nice, solid unit, but like a lot of stuff in the army, very pricey. So just again, be careful with what you're doing. Make sure you're making decisions based on what you need for your army and not just what looks cool, right? So let's move on to the next. You have the Venerable Contemptor Dreadnought. Not going to talk a lot about this one. If you've seen the Contemptor in other books, you're more or less looking at the same thing here. So not a lot to it. Yeah, you got the Carries pattern assault cannon. You got the Multi-Melta Dreadnought close combat weapon. His standard stuff. The unyielding ancient. The automatic. Automatic shielding. So pretty standard for the Dreadnought. To be completely honest, I don't think you're really going to see a lot of this particular Dreadnought. If you see some of the Forge World variants out there, I think we might see a little bit more of them. But I think in an army that's already pretty expensive as it is, there are other units that you can take a look at that will have a greater impact on the army itself, especially considering that your bog standard Custodians are not that much less tougher at toughness 5 or toughness 7. So, I mean, a lot of stuff that's going to be firing at the Dreadnought is already going to be firing at everything else anyway. And you're not going to see a lot of benefit from those extra 2 points of toughness unless you're going up against an army that has an absolute load of, like, strength 9 las cannons or something like that. Because, I mean, if you're looking at strength 8 and under, it doesn't really change the wound rolls for either unit. So again, it's nice. It can make a nice distraction Carnifex for you, something big and beefy. But all in all, unless you really need something to soak up a lot of wounds, I don't see the Contemptor Dreadnought being a huge benefit to the Custodes force in general. I think there's other. Next up, we have what I think, and it looks like a lot of the internet thinks right now, is the real MVP of the book, and that is the Virtus Praetors. These are the guys, the Custodes on jet bikes. And these guys are absolutely fantastic. You have your standard stat line for Custodes, but then because of the jet bike, you're looking at toughness 6. They got their 4 wounds, their 4 attacks. They got their 2-up save. They hit like a friggin' Mack truck. I mean, their Interceptor Lance gives them +1 strength, I believe. Yeah, +1 strength, -3 AP. -3 AP, as well as D3 damage, and on the turn that they charge, they can re-roll failed wound rolls, which is absolutely fantastic because it means that you're hitting hard and you got that much more chance to make sure that hit goes through. You pair this with a shield captain on a Dawn Eagle jet bike, and all of a sudden you're re-rolling your hits as well, your hits of 1 as well. So absolutely great units. They got their 14-inch movement on the jet bikes, which means they are getting to wherever they need to go. And to really supplement this, they have their their Implacable Vanguard ability as well. So when they advance, they always assume an advance of 6, which means that's giving them a 20-inch threat range when they advance. You can get across the table in no time flat with these guys. And then you factor in their weapons as well. They got their Hurricane Bolters, which is just the standard stuff. So anything within 12 inches is all of a sudden getting 12 shots with the Hurricane Bolters, hitting on 2s, with a shield captain, re-rolling those 1s. And with the 14-inch movement range, like that is a massive threat range. That puts it up basically to a 26-inch threat range for rapid-firing Hurricane Bolters. which is just absolutely massive. They will rip basic infantry to shreds with this one. Even units that have a 3+ armor save and whatnot is still going to have to worry about it, because if you're looking at a minimum unit of 3 of these guys, that's going to be 36 bolter shots going at them. Just the law of averages. I mean, saves are going to be failed on that front with how many hits they're going to be getting, how many wounds they're probably going to be dishing out there. So absolutely fantastic unit. And then of course you can even look into the salvo launcher for these guys as well, which gives them either a melta missile or a flak burst missile. So if you know you're going up against units with a lot of flyers or something like that, the flak burst missile is really nice because it gives you a little bit of extra oomph to hit them. And then of course the melta missile gives you that high strength, high damage output that you need against vehicles or big monstrous creatures or primarchs or stuff like that. So these guys are absolutely phenomenal. They are definitely the standout of the force itself. Their only real downside, and I'm just double checking this here. Yeah, their only real downside is basically their cost. Before you look into weapons, they are coming in at 80 points a pop. So I mean, 240 points for 3 of them. That's before you even give them their weapons. They add up very quickly. I think the smallest force you could put together of them would be like a Dawn Eagle jet bike, or a shield captain on Dawn Eagle jet bike, and 3 units of 3 Virtus Praetors. And I think that comes in at like 966 points for 10 models. So they add up like really quickly. But you know what? They have the durability to back it up. They have the punch to really decimate units that they focus on. I think with these guys, they can be an amazing surgical strike force. You're going to be able to throw them at a unit that you absolutely need to have taken down, and more often than not, they're going to do the trick. I think the way to use these guys is you focus fire down infantry squads or objective holders, and then you try to charge in to other units with their lances and just decimate them with the higher strength and the low AP and whatnot. So absolutely great unit. You're probably going to see this one on the table a lot for anyone who's running the Custodes. I know myself personally, I'm going to be running the force I just talked about, so the shield captain and the 3 units. So absolutely great. Love the models. Absolutely gorgeous model. Definitely the MVP in the book, if you ask me. And I think a lot of people on the internet seem to be sharing that. Last unit in the book is the Land Raider. What can I say? It's a Land Raider. You see one Land Raider, you've seen them all. They have their toughness 8. They got massive amounts of wounds at 16 wounds. They're definitely nice, but I'm still not sure where Land Raiders really sit in this new edition. Simply because of how much they are. I mean, 283 points before you start factoring in upgrades and whatnot. They're a nice way of giving some mobility to some of your Custodes units, if you really need to get them across the table. But honestly, short of that, I'm not seeing a real strong place for the Land Raider. With the way a lot of the meta seems to be going with popular builds for units and whatnot for the Custodes, I don't think the Land Raider is going to see a lot of play on the table, unless of course you're seeing the battalion detachments come out, in which case you're looking at a lot of Custodes, you're looking at a lot of ground pounders, where they're going to need a way to get across the table and get to those objectives. But short of that, again, it's a Land Raider. It's nice, it's beefy, it provides a nice distraction target for units and whatnot. I don't think it really offers a lot to the army short of giving an extra a bit of protection to units that are already rather durable to get across the table, and it eats into a lot of points. If you're looking at a 1,500 point to 2,000 point army, a Land Raider takes up a lot of that. Anywhere from 20% of your force to a little bit like maybe 15%. In an already inexpensive army, I just don't see it being worth the points, kind of like the Contemptor Dreadnought. So it's there, makes a nice centerpiece. I personally last stuff I'm going to talk about is just some of the extras that the Custodes have, so things like the Warlord traits, the stratagems, and the relics. I'm not going to go over each and every one of these things, mostly because there's an absolute ton of relics, absolute ton of stratagems, and we see a lot of overlap. There's a lot of the generic stratagems that have been making it into the books. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pick out a couple key ones that I think are the real winners of the book for both the relics and the stratagems, and we'll just go over those. First relic I'm going to talk about is going to be the Raiment of Sorrows, and this one plays into what I was talking about earlier about how with a hyper elite army you want to improve durability, you want to get as much out of them. And this one is a great one for it, because basically any Adeptus Custodes infantry or biker model within 6 inches of a character with this relic, they're going to, on a 4+, when they die on a 4+, they're basically going to get one last shooting phase or one last attack phase. And this is absolutely fantastic, because that's an extra little bit of oomph to that unit. So when you have a model that's already putting on a lot of attacks in close combat or a lot of shooting attacks, that just allows you to put that much more out there, and it can make the difference between removing a unit that's about to attack back or shoot back in the next turn or something like that. So absolutely great relic. The Auric Aquila is another one that I really like. It grants, it's for the biker only, but it grants a 3-up invulnerable save. You know, really nice. It's a way of improving that durability, because anything that has a toughness 6 and 3-up invulnerable save, that's gonna be a pain to remove. But the reason I really like this one is that it allows you to reroll failed charges, and for a small army, you need to make sure you get your charges off. You need to be where you have to be on the battlefield, and you can't really have a lot of guesswork. So having that ability to reroll those charges, really nice. I think there's some better relics out there, but for maybe Imperial Soup or for using the Virtus Praetor list and whatnot, it's really nice, because it means that you have a very good chance of getting into the combat that you need. The next up is going to be the Praetorian Plate. Now this one's a really interesting one. I don't know how competitive it's going to be, but it has a very interesting mechanic. Basically, when you set the model up, you nominate an Imperium infantry character, and at the end of an opponent's charge subphase, if there is an enemy unit within, within 1 inch of that character that you've nominated, you can basically pick up this character with a Praetorian Plate and move them and set them up within 3 inches of that character and within 1 inch of the enemy model. Which basically means you just got your own beefy fight stick of a character into the enemy unit right away, and you now have a rather big beat stick going up against the enemy. So that can make a big difference. The only downside is that it's only for Terminator characters, so Alaris Custodians or anyone with the Alaris Terminator plate. So you got to keep that in mind if you're going to be running it. But it's definitely a neat relic, definitely one that I think people are going to play around with, and we might very well see on a lot Imperial Soup style armies. There are a couple other relics that look really fun and interesting to play with. Things like the Auric Shackles, which reduce an enemy character's attack characteristics against the bearer of it. Things like the Castellan's Mark, which allows you to do sort of a redeployment after everyone is deployed. There's a couple things that replace the Vexilla for the Custodes or for the Praetor that has those, and they add some interesting things. All in all, though, there's a lot of selection in the relics themselves. I think there's a lot of stuff that you can definitely play around with that makes for some interesting dynamics in the game. What people end up using, I'm not entirely sure, and a lot of this comes back down to the fact that I'm not sure how many armies we're going to see that are primarily made up of Custodes. And until we sort of get a better feel for that point, it's hard to say just how powerful some of these relics are. But there's definitely some stuff worth playing around with, especially things like the Gatekeeper, the Emperor's Light, the Veiled Blade, the Obliteratum. There's just so much. There's things that modify weapons, modify an attacking profile, shooting profile. So yeah, there's definitely some interesting stuff. But I think my favorites are definitely things like the Auric Aquilas, the Praetorian Plate, and the Raiment of Sorrows. And I think the Raiment of Sorrows is probably the one where we're probably going to see the most of, just because of that extra fight or shooting action that they can take, that they can actually take part of. So yeah, so that's kind of a brief rundown of the relics that are available. Let's go take a look at the stratagems. So the Adeptus Custodes stratagems actually have a very rich selection of them, but it's kind of interesting because with how expensive the Custodes ends up being, I don't think a lot of Custodes, at least pure Custodes armies, are going to have a lot of command points to actually play with. Like obviously you'll get your base 3 for being battle forged, but it's not going to be often that we see a full battalion or brigade style Custodes list. It's probably going to be made up of smaller detachments. So some of these stratagems, especially the high cost ones, which are extremely good, they're going to be one-trick ponies for the game. For instance, you take something like the Vexilla Teleport Homer. This one is really neat in the sense that at the end of the end of the movement phase, you can actually set an Adeptus Custodes unit up within 6 inches of the Vexillus Praetor, and 3 inches away from an enemy unit. So it's another way of pulling a Custodes unit, especially like maybe a tougher HQ unit or something like that, into a position where it can take advantage of its beefy combat stats. But at 3 command points, I mean, you're going to get one of those, maybe 2 tops, depending on how you build your army. But it can possibly be a game changer. Now you might see a little bit more of these in the Imperial soup lists, which I would expect that. But on smaller lists or pure Custodes lists, probably won't see a whole lot of it. There's some other really cool things. I really like the Tanglefoot Grenade. This one basically 12 inches within an Adeptus Custodes infantry unit. You basically can force an enemy unit to move d6 inches less in the movement or the charge phase, depending on when you use it. This could be a big one for keeping an enemy unit out of position, or just ensuring that you get the charge off on them as opposed to them getting the charge on you. Units that might deal mortal wounds on the charge, I believe some of the jetpack units for the Primaris Marines do that. I know the Squigoth and Gargantuan Squigoth for orcs do that, where they get this interesting mechanic where they deal mortal wounds on a successful charge. This can really change that game up quite a bit, simply because d6 inches can very easily be the difference between a successful or a failed charge. So really nice one. Another cool one that was actually shown to us before the release of it was Unleash the Lions, and this one's a 2 command point one. And this is the one where it allows a unit of Alaris Terminator, the Alaris Custodians, to basically split up into a bunch of individual units. So if you have a unit of 5 of them, they all become a unit of 1, and they can go off and do their own thing. Now this one's an interesting one because they all gain, I believe... Okay, it says nothing about them getting the character keyword, but they all become separate units, so you're all of a sudden saturating everything with target priorities. You have a whole bunch of threats across the table. You can spread them out. It's a fun one. I don't know if it's going to be a really competitive one, but it's definitely one that I want to try using at least once. Another really neat one is actually Shoulder the Mantle. It's a 1 command point stratagem. But the interesting thing about this one is that when your warlord is killed, you can basically choose another shield captain in the army, and then they immediately become your warlord. You generate a warlord trait for them and everything. But what makes this interesting, though, it's actually a way of denying your opponent a Slay the Warlord victory points, which, I mean, again, that can make the difference between winning the game outright or, just squeaking by or even getting a bit of a loss. And it can be a really frustrating one because, a lot of time players will put a lot of effort into trying to take out the warlord. They'll throw some of their heaviest hitters at it, and the ability to simply say, okay, well, now this other guy is going to be our warlord. Again, really, really useful. I like that one a lot as well. In addition to the unique stratagems that the Custodes bring forth, they do have a bunch of other ones that you do see roll down in other books as well. The types of stratagems that maybe modify your ability to wound, your ability to shoot. Some elements, for instance, like Wisdom of the Ancients is one that we've seen pop up. There's a lot of repeat mechanics in there, and it's kind of a theme we've been seeing in a lot of the stratagems. In that there are some overlap in them. We see some similar mechanics work their way in. But overall, the stratagems do definitely add some nice punch to the Custodes. They allow you to go in and do some things that, again, for a small elite army, you really need, and that's, maybe some extra shooting, some extra attacks, or the ability to hit a little bit harder. The reposition ones are really nice, things like the teleport homers where you can deep strike in a unit, or just saturate with more targets. So there's some really nice options with the stratagems, definitely some stuff worth taking a look at and playing around with. the big thing is what's going to be competitive, what's not. I can see different stratagems being used for different types of games depending on where you're at. If you're just playing friendly, casual, playing competitive, and just some interesting stuff. The one downside, though, is that I'm not seeing a huge amount of synergy between the Custodes stratagems and how they might interact with other armies. A lot of them are very much geared towards the success of the Adeptus Custodes themselves, which is, it's odd because we see a nice amount of synergy with the rest of the army. Things with the Vexillus Praetor being able to buff Imperial infantry units, or other Custodes units being really filling in a gap that might exist in another army and whatnot. Whereas the stratagems for the Custodes are very much, they benefit the Custodes. They're designed to help them. They're not really designed to work with other armies. And I don't mean that they need to be usable on the other armies, but I don't see a lot of... I guess what I'm saying is that in a lot of cases in an Imperial soup army, I think I might almost prefer using the stratagems for the other Imperial army over the Custodes ones. Mostly because the Custodes hit pretty hard as it is. They do have a fair amount of durability, and those valuable command points might be better spent on the other Imperial army. But again, it's all going to depend on what you're running. So, I mean, those are just my thoughts on the stratagems. Take them as you will, but, you know what, definitely worth looking through the book. And the last thing I'm going to talk about before I get into my final thoughts on the army itself, we're going to talk about the warlord traits. And to be honest, there's really only two that jump out and strike me as really interesting, really useful ones. And that's the Champion of the Imperium and the Radiant Mantle. The quick one first, the Radiant Mantle, very self-explanatory. Any rolls of shooting against your, or actually, sorry, any to hit rolls against your warlord is at -1, or rather subtract 1, and then that's a big deal. I mean, the warlords themselves are the HQs for Custodes are already pretty tough as it is. Now that you're removing the ability for the enemy units to hit them more effectively, that's just really nice. That's really golden, if you will. The ability to keep your warlord alive a little bit longer, especially something as hard hitting as an Adeptus Custodes unit. You pair that with the shield captain on Dawn Eagle Bike, where they have their toughness 6, they're 2 up save, they're 3 up invulnerable, or like 3 or 4 up invulnerable, and then you -1 or subtract 1 to enemy rolls to hit. That's a durable unit right there. So that one really stands out for me. The other one I really like, the Champion of the Imperium. This one is really neat because it allows infantry, bikers, and dreadnoughts that of the Adeptus Custodes to basically make heroic interventions. And again, in an army that you need everything firing on all cylinders because of how few models you have, this is absolutely massive because it means that a lot more of your enemy or of your models are going to be able to get into combat. Your opponents are going to have to think twice about charging in, because if you position your guys well enough, you're going to be able to have them step into a melee combat. They're always going to be assisting and fighting with each other, and this can really be a big deal. Now, granted, it's only within 12 inches of your warlord, but with how small the army is, that's not hard to do. You can definitely position your guys easily enough to take advantage of that. So that's a really big one as well, and I think those two are going to be the ones that are most often chosen, simply because they just add so much to the army. So my final thoughts on the Adeptus Custodes as an army itself. It's interesting. I don't necessarily think that that the game needed the Custodes to be an army. And I say that from a couple perspectives. One, we already have a hyper elite army in the form of the Grey Knights, and it kind of feels like the Custodes do what the Grey Knights were kind of supposed to do. Now, granted, a little biased as I am a Grey Knight player myself, but it makes the Grey Knights feel a little redundant at this point, because the Custodes seem to do what they do, only better, basically. I mean, the Grey Knights have a couple more tricks as far as mobility goes, but they're not as tough. They don't have the staying power, and they're almost as expensive in a lot of regards. So that's my first thought, that I don't know if they were necessarily needed. They don't really fill a hole that wasn't there. The second thing is that I personally feel like the army itself is it helps the Imperial soup armies, and that's not really what the game needs right now. The game needs to see a stronger presence from the Xenos factions, something non-Imperial. And this is mostly for the sake of diversity, for the sake of the health of the game and whatnot. I mean, it's great to see these models on the table. They look absolutely gorgeous, especially when they're painted up well. It's, in my opinion, it's rare to see an army that's all metallics look really solid, simply because it's very easy to almost become too much. But it feels like these guys just fill another role in the Imperial soup that was already filled by other armies. So seeing more of them more Imperial armies on the table, more of these super soldiers on the table, not necessarily something that we needed, but you know what? They're fun. They're neat to see on the table. They have some really neat rules attached to them. They look impressive beyond belief, especially those jet bikes. So I'm not deriding the army as a whole. It's an interesting decision. Now, having said that, it is an expensive army. You are not going to be running a lot of models with this army. I would wager even a large Custodes army, you're probably going to be topping out at maybe 25-30 models tops. And that would even be a larger army. I think a lot of the times you're going to see the Custodes on the table are going to be mostly in the form of the jet bike allied detachments, simply because you can get a lot of punch out of those ones for roughly 1,000 points. The other units, the other entries in the book, just they don't seem to have that oomph to them. They're either just a little bit too expensive, or they don't quite hit hard enough, or they don't have that lasting power. Whereas the bikes, they have the toughness, they have the firepower to put out a lot of shots, they can hit hard in combat. So I think that's what we're going to mostly see on the table, and that's actually kind of unfortunate because they're all gorgeous models. I think they all have some interesting places on the table in the game, but I think they're just a little bit too niche of an army. Now, having said that, Imperial soup, that seems to be a running theme for the Imperial armies these days. You're going to see a lot of overlap on the Imperial armies, and that's almost where this army seems to come and fit into the whole thing. They're designed to supplement the Imperial armies, be it Space Marines, be it Astra Militarum, or Grey Knights, Death Watch, whatever. That's kind of their role. So we're probably going to see them maybe splashed in to a couple armies here and there. I don't expect we're going to see a lot of pure Custodes armies just for that fact, though, because I mean they are costly. They are very expensive. The fact that you can do a 2,000 point army that's 20 models is it's very telling right there. Now, having said that, I'm very glad that a lot of the options that do exist in the book do seem to take into account the fact that you are running with very few models. There's some really neat tricks in regards to getting your characters or your units around the table. There's some neat tricks as far as combat shenanigans go, being able to increase your attacks or your ability to hit. There is a lot of synergy within the Custodes units themselves, which I really like. One of my big concerns was, would they be able to put on the amount of firepower they need to win in a game that is predominantly shooting based? And while the answer is kind of no, it's with the caveat of they have a lot more firepower available to them than I originally expected. A lot of their weapons have a lot more shots to them every phase than I would have figured. There's some nice options to try and get them additional shooting phases, or even just force everything into combat a little bit more. So there is that really nice synergy there, and it looks like they have sort of addressed the hyper elite question of the army itself. I think they might suffer from against hordes, simply because you can only roll so many dice before your saves begin to fail on you, and I think against some other elite armies they might not do so well. Like I think if they get into combat with Grey Knights, if Grey Knights get the charge off, I think that's going to do a number against Grey Knights, because they can, or against the Custodes, because Grey Knights can put down a lot of high damage attacks in melee especially. So it'll be interesting to see how the Custodes armies pans out in the long run. I think where they're really going to find their sweet spot is in things like character assassination or high value targets. I think we're going to see a lot of people use them to basically go into a game and remove that one thing that they need to have gone, those linchpin units. So it's going to be interesting to see how. There we go. Those are my thoughts on the Adeptus Custodes Codex. I realize this has been a kind of a long video, so for anyone who watched it all the way through or listened to it all the way through, thank you very much. Hopefully you guys enjoyed listening to my thoughts on it, whether or not you agree with them or not. I always like to hear responses on this one, so if you do have any comments, by all means leave them below. I do try to read everything that pops up. And if you want to see more content like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, and let me know what you want to see more of in the future. And as always, guys, happy wargaming.